I want to tell you something powerful, something that most people don't realize until they experience it. There's a moment in every relationship when you feel like you're giving, but you're not getting back what you deserve. So what happens if you stop? What happens if you stop reaching out, stop calling, stop chasing? Does she just forget about you? Does she move on? Let me tell you, she doesn't just forget, she changes. And you need to know exactly how, because it's not what you think. The silence you think might create distance, it actually pulls her closer. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll see why taking that step back is one of the most powerful moves you can make. You've been there, right? Always the first to text, to call, to show up. But what happens when you stop? Here's the thing. When you stop reaching out, it's like a light bulb goes off in her mind. The absence of your presence forces her to think, to reflect. And in that silence, she starts to see things from a different perspective. What she once took for granted now becomes a valuable thing she can't ignore. Your absence makes her realize how much she relied on you. The truth is, when you're always there, you lose your value. You're just a constant. But when you stop reaching out, the dynamic shifts. Your attention, your time, your energy. Suddenly, it becomes rare. It's no longer something she gets whenever she wants. It's something she has to work for. And that shift in value is exactly what makes her take notice. She starts to understand the real worth of having you around. And when she does, she's going to respect you a lot more. One of the most powerful things you can do is ignite curiosity. And you know what sparks curiosity? Your absence. When you stop reaching out, the questions start running through her mind. Why isn't he texting me? Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? That uncertainty opens up a whole new world of questions. And as those questions pile up, she begins to wonder, what's going on? But that's when the curiosity truly begins. This is huge. When you stop chasing, something remarkable happens. She learns to respect you. Why? Because your actions are saying, I know my worth. I don't need to chase anyone. You've pulled back. You've stopped being available at every moment. And now she has to deal with the reality of what it's like without your constant attention. She'll begin to respect the man who knows his value enough to not settle for anything less than equal effort in return. You won't hear her admit it, but the changes in her actions are obvious. She won't come out and say, I miss you, or I've been thinking about you, but you'll notice the subtle things, the random texts, the social media likes, the questions about your life. These are all signs that she's trying to reconnect in her own way. She's no longer in control of the situation, and that shift tells you everything you need to know. She's feeling the void you left behind. When you stop reaching out, the power balance in the relationship shifts. All of a sudden, she's no longer the one who controls the pace of things. You've stepped back, and in that space, she starts to reevaluate her position. She starts to feel what it's like to not have your energy at her fingertips. This power shift is subtle, but incredibly powerful. You're no longer the one chasing her. She's the one who has to now think about how she feels and how much she values you. Here's the thing. It's not about playing games. It's not about trying to get a reaction. It's about knowing your worth. When you stop reaching out, when you step back, you're teaching her how to value you. And you're teaching yourself that your time, your energy, your attention, they are all precious. So next time you feel like you're giving too much and not getting enough, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to take a step back. Let her feel the difference. And watch how everything changes. If this resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. We're just getting started. When you stop reaching out, one of the most significant shifts that happen is in how she begins to perceive you. Before you stepped back, you were always available, always there when she needed you, always the first one to call or text, always giving your time and energy. But when you remove yourself from that constant presence, it forces her to think differently. The absence of your consistent outreach creates a gap, a void that makes her reassess the situation. She starts looking at things from a new perspective because for the first time, she's seeing the relationship dynamic from a place of distance. The silence isn't just a break in communication. It's a space for reflection and a moment of realization. What once felt like something guaranteed, something that was always available to her, suddenly becomes rare and meaningful. She starts to realize that she took your attention and time for granted. And now that you're not around as much, it feels different. Your absence speaks volumes, louder than any message or gesture you could send. The truth is, sometimes it takes stepping back for her to understand the significance of your presence in her life. She's no longer surrounded by your constant messages or calls. What was once familiar and easily accessible has now become something more valuable because it's no longer given freely. This absence creates a mental and emotional shift in her. As she notices the lack of your outreach, her mind starts to wander and process the change. She wonders why things are different now. Is there something she did? Did you lose interest? Did something happen that made you pull away? These questions won't just stay in her mind for a day, they'll linger and turn over repeatedly. She will try to analyze her actions, figure out where things went wrong, and understand why the dynamic has shifted. But in that process, the longer she contemplates your absence, the more she starts to realize how much she actually values your presence. As she processes the change, a new level of awareness emerges. The absence forces her to rethink the connection and appreciate what you brought to the relationship. You were there, present, always giving, and now that you've stepped back, she's starting to see the impact of your efforts, not just in the things you did, but in how your consistent attention made her feel. And that shift isn't something she can ignore. The truth is, when you're always there, always the one reaching out, people can get used to it. It's easy to take things for granted when they're always available. But when you stop, it's like pressing pause on something that was once a constant. And in that silence, she's left to really sit with her feelings and think about what it all meant. It's in those moments of silence that she begins to understand your true value, not just as someone who was always there, but as someone who is worthy of respect and appreciation. This change in perception is one of the most powerful aspects of stopping your outreach. It's not just about creating space for her to miss you. It's about allowing her the opportunity to see things more clearly, to appreciate you in ways she may not have before. When you pull back, you give her the space to process the relationship without the constant reassurance of your presence. And that space allows for growth, both for her and for the relationship. When you stop reaching out, you change the entire dynamic of the relationship, and in doing so, you allow her to experience something powerful, what it feels like to miss you. Before you stopped, you were always the one initiating. You were the one reaching out, checking in, making sure everything was good, and keeping the connection alive. Your efforts, however well-meaning, became routine. It wasn't a matter of if you'd reach out, it was simply when. You were always there, and your availability might have unintentionally dulled the value of your attention. But the moment you stop, you introduce a new level of rarity to the relationship. And that rarity creates something precious in her eyes. You might not realize it, but when you're constantly present, your actions can easily blend into the background of her life. She's used to you being a constant. And in that consistency, it's easy to take you for granted, but when you stop reaching out, you create a void, a gap in her daily routine. That absence becomes loud in its own way. It starts to make her wonder about the reasons behind the change. What happened? Did something go wrong? Did she say something to push you away? Or worse yet, is your interest waning? In those moments of wondering, she begins to realize how much she relied on you. Your absence isn't just a pause in communication. It's an invitation for her to take a step back and reflect on the relationship from a new angle. As she processes the silence, it forces her to reassess the emotional significance of the connection you shared. She no longer has the comfort of knowing you'll always be there, and that makes her start to look at things differently. She may begin to see all the little things you did that she took for granted. How you always checked in, how you showed up when needed, how you made her feel like a priority. And when you stop reaching out, you inadvertently make her realize how much she misses those things, how much she needs them in her life. The effect is subtle, but it's powerful. She begins to feel the void left by your absence, and that feeling prompts her to appreciate you in ways she hadn't before. When you're always there, there's no urgency in the relationship. But when you step back, you give her the opportunity to miss you, to wonder about you, and to truly recognize the value you bring. X is my brother, say that, Regina. This change in how she perceives you is a natural response to the absence you've created. By taking a step back, you force her to realize that you're not just a given, you're someone worthy of her attention and respect. She starts to value the connection you share, and in turn, the dynamic of the relationship shifts. Now, you've become something to be appreciated, not taken for granted. When you stop reaching out, you give her the space to process her own emotions and desires. Instead of her relying on your constant communication to feel secure, she has to confront her feelings independently. This independence of feeling forces her to examine the relationship and her role within it. It makes her question her level of investment, her interest in you, and whether she's been giving enough in return. And that is a pivotal moment in any relationship. That shift in perception allows for growth, both for her and for the relationship. It creates a new foundation built on appreciation, respect, and understanding, where you are no longer just a fixture in her life, but someone she wants to actively engage with. When you stop reaching out, one of the most significant shifts you'll see is in the way she begins to question her own feelings for you. Before, everything was familiar. You were always there, sending the texts, making the calls, showing your interest, keeping the connection alive. Your presence was a constant in her life. But that very consistency may have made her take it for granted. The moment you stop reaching out, something happens. Her world, which was once filled with your communication, suddenly has a gap. She starts to feel the absence, and that absence creates a powerful question in her mind. What's going on? At first, it might be subtle. She might not even notice the first few moments of silence. But as the days pass, she begins to feel it. That lack of connection that she was once so used to. In the beginning, she might shrug it off, thinking it's just a temporary phase. But as the silence continues, her curiosity grows. She starts asking herself questions. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Why hasn't he reached out? This uncertainty opens the door for something powerful, curiosity. And curiosity, my friend, is a force to be reckoned with. It doesn't just go away, it lingers and festers. The more she thinks about the situation, the more her mind begins to spin, trying to make sense of your absence. She'll replay your past interactions, analyzing every conversation, every moment you shared, trying to figure out what went wrong. And with each passing day, her thoughts only deepen. She starts wondering if she's somehow pushed you away. This internal questioning forces her to look at the relationship from a new perspective. She's no longer taking it for granted as she might have when everything was flowing easily. Now, with your absence, she's forced to recognize the value of your presence. She has to confront the fact that your attention was something that mattered to her, even if she didn't acknowledge it before. And in that realization, she starts to question how she feels about you, what she wants, and what you mean to her. What happens next is often a shift in how she sees you. As she wonders about your intentions, she begins to miss the connection you provided. That gap you created by stopping your outreach is like a missing piece of her puzzle, and now she feels compelled to fill it. This desire to reconnect doesn't always happen consciously. But over time, she starts to feel the void. And when she feels that emptiness, she can't help but be drawn back toward you. The silence doesn't just make her wonder about you, it makes her question her own feelings. She begins to ask herself, how important is he to me? What do I really want from this relationship? And in asking those questions, she's forced to evaluate her own emotional investment. It's not about you playing games or trying to get her attention. It's about the simple power of absence, of stepping back and letting her navigate her own feelings. What's fascinating is that she might not immediately act on these questions. She might not come running back to you right away, but deep inside, the absence you've created forces her to deal with her feelings in a more honest way. And that process, that self-reflection, will change the way she sees you and the relationship you share. The questions she's asking herself are leading her to realize just how much she values you and how much she truly cares. And when that realization clicks, the way she interacts with you will be entirely different than before. When you stop reaching out, another significant shift happens within her that often goes unnoticed. She begins to wonder if she's losing you, and that fear of loss brings about a sense of urgency. Before the relationship felt safe, your consistent communication created a comfort zone. She knew you would always reach out, so there was no need to act quickly. She might have been living in the security of the connection without realizing that real effort and attention are required to maintain it. But now that you've stopped initiating, the comfort is disrupted. And this disruption sends a clear message. Something has changed. And it's up to her to figure out what that change means. As the days pass, without you reaching out, she begins to feel a sense of anxiety creeping in. The once familiar rhythm of communication that she could count on is now missing. This absence makes her question whether you are still interested in her. It forces her to confront the possibility that you may have lost interest, or that something about the connection no longer holds the same value for you. This is a powerful realization for her because it challenges her own sense of control in the relationship. She had been accustomed to knowing that you were always there, but now, without your outreach, she's left to navigate the silence. And in that silence, the fear of loss becomes real. This fear is not just about losing you, it's about realizing how much you brought to her life. Before, the thought of losing you might not have been as vivid because your presence felt constant. But now, with the shift in your behavior, the idea of losing you becomes something she must face head on. This fear triggers a change in her behavior. She might begin to act differently, trying to fill the void with other distractions or people. But deep down, she knows that no one else will take your place. The absence of your outreach has shown her how important you were in her life, how much you mattered in a way she may not have recognized when you were constantly there. The change in her behavior can take many forms. She might start reaching out more herself, attempting to fill the space you left behind, but it's not just about filling a gap. It's about reclaiming something she fears she's losing. If she's truly invested in the relationship, this fear of losing you will push her to take action. She may start initiating contact, asking questions, or showing more interest in reconnecting. Is that scary? But the shift is not just an attempt to keep the relationship going. It's a sign that she has come to value your presence and the connection you shared in a way she hadn't before. This fear of loss creates an emotional urgency that wasn't there before. The urgency doesn't come from a place of desperation, but rather from the realization that she doesn't want to lose something valuable. It's a shift in priorities. When you were always the one reaching out, there was no need for her to fully invest emotionally. She could take it for granted. But now that she's facing the possibility of losing you, she's forced to take a closer look at what the relationship means to her and whether she's willing to put in the effort to keep it alive. As she grapples with this fear, her understanding of the relationship deepens. She's no longer just going through the motions. She's recognizing the real emotional investment that's required to make it work. This realization doesn't always happen overnight, but the longer you remain distant, the more intense her desire to preserve the relationship becomes. The fear of losing you pushes her to evaluate her own role in the connection. And that evaluation can lead to a shift in how she interacts with you, how she shows up in the relationship, and how she values what you bring to it. The longer you stop reaching out, the more she'll realize that the effort to maintain the connection needs to come from both sides, and that realization may bring her back to you in a way that is more intentional, more emotionally invested, and ultimately more meaningful for both of you. When you stop reaching out, you'll see her start to reassess her own actions and the role she plays in the relationship. This self-reflection is something that often goes unnoticed, but it's one of the most important changes that happens when you pull back. Before, the dynamic between you two may have been predictable. She knew you would always initiate, always be there to keep the communication flowing, to keep the connection strong. But when that stops, it forces her to look at the relationship through a different lens. The absence of your outreach makes her question not only where things stand between you two, but also how much effort she's been putting into maintaining the connection. It's easy for her to take the relationship for granted when everything is flowing smoothly. But now, with your absence, she begins to see the imbalance. She might start to feel that something is missing, but she also realizes that it's not all on you. The realization that relationships require effort from both sides often comes when one side stops putting in the work. And when you stop reaching out, she's left to reflect on whether she has been contributing enough to keep the relationship alive. This self-awareness is not always immediate. At first, she might be too caught up in wondering why you're not reaching out to notice that the relationship dynamic was uneven. But over time, as the silence stretches, she starts to look inward. She wonders if she has been neglecting her part in the relationship, if she's been too passive or too comfortable, relying too much on your effort to keep things moving. And that's a powerful realization for her to have. It forces her to ask herself tough questions. Have I been taking him for granted? Have I been as invested as I should be? What have I done to contribute to the relationship's growth? These questions might come with a sense of guilt, but they also open the door for growth. Once she realizes that relationships require mutual effort, it becomes an opportunity for her to step up and put in the work. She might not even have been aware of the imbalance before, but now that it's been made clear by your absence, she's forced to take responsibility for her part in the connection. This introspection also leads her to evaluate her feelings for you more deeply. She starts to think about what you mean to her and how she feels when you're not around. Does she miss you? Does she care enough to make changes? The questions she's asking herself will eventually lead her to a better understanding of her emotional, and in many cases, this leads to a stronger connection, because after this self-reflection, she comes to realize that she values you more than she might have before. The beauty of this self-reflection is that it's not something you can force. It has to come from her. When you stop reaching out, you give her the space to reflect, to consider her own role in the relationship, and to come to terms with what she wants. And when she comes to that realization on her own, it's far more powerful than if you had simply told her. By stepping back, you not only give her the chance to see how much she values the relationship, but also the opportunity to change. And if she does step up and make the effort to reconnect, you'll see a difference in how she approaches you. More respect, more care, and a deeper emotional investment than before. This change might take time, but the key is that it's rooted in her own realization and willingness to put in the work. And that makes it far more meaningful. When you stop reaching out, one of the most profound shifts that takes place is in how she begins to view you and your intentions. Up until now, you've been the one taking initiative, sending the messages, making the calls, and ensuring the connection between you two remains strong. But when you stop reaching out, something starts to change in her perception of who you are and what you want. The absence of communication, even if it's only for a short time, forces her to think deeply about what your intentions really were. It's no longer as simple as you just being the one who cared or made the first move. At first, she may feel confused, unsure of what to make of the silence. In the absence of your usual outreach, she starts questioning whether you're pulling away because of something she did or if you simply don't care anymore. This uncertainty, rather than pushing her away, often pulls her in. As the days without communication stretch on, she begins to look at the relationship with more clarity. The silence forces her to reevaluate how she sees you. Were you truly invested, or was this just another phase? Was there a deeper meaning to your connection, or was it simply convenient for the moment? This change in perception is powerful because it shifts the power dynamic. She no longer holds the assumption that you're always going to be there, that you'll always be the one who reaches out. With the removal of your usual efforts, she's forced to reassess her own role in the connection. This shift allows her to see you in a new light, often with a renewed respect for your boundaries, your intentions, and your own needs. And this transformation can make her value you more than she did before. In many cases, when you stop reaching out, she will start to question her own feelings and whether she's truly invested in the relationship. The silence and absence of your efforts creates space for her to realize how much you really meant to her. And the fact that she has to think twice about it often triggers a change in her attitude toward you. She'll start to wonder if she's truly been as emotionally present as she should have been, or if she has been taking you for granted. It forces her to face the reality that relationships require effort from both sides, and that effort needs to be sustained, not just given in spurts when convenient. As she processes her thoughts and feelings about you, there's a shift in how she views the relationship. She may start to feel a sense of regret for not being more engaged, and this regret can prompt a change in how she interacts with you when she eventually reaches out. It's as if the absence has given her a new understanding of your value and what you bring to her life. This new perspective can make her more open, more thoughtful, and more willing to put in the effort to make sure the connection continues. The change in how she sees you is not just about the silence itself, it's about what that silence reveals. It shows her that relationships can't just be one-sided. It reveals the importance of mutual investment, of both people showing up and being present in the relationship. The absence forces her to think about her own actions, and in many cases, it sparks a desire to make changes. Whether it's a change in how she communicates, how she shows up for you, or how she values the connection, the shift in her perception is powerful. Ultimately, when you stop reaching out, you give her the opportunity to reassess not only the relationship, but also her own role in it. The silence allows her to take a step back and view things from a more objective perspective. And when she reaches her own conclusions, it can lead to a stronger, more balanced dynamic between you two. One built on mutual understanding and respect. In conclusion, when you stop reaching out, you initiate a powerful change in the dynamic between you and her. The silence that follows forces her to reflect on her own role in the relationship, her feelings, and her investment. As she navigates the uncertainty, she begins to realize how much you truly meant to her, and this realization often leads her to step up and put in the effort to reconnect. She sees the value of mutual effort and starts to appreciate what was once taken for granted. The absence of your outreach doesn't push her away, it pulls her in, making her reevaluate her emotions, her actions, and her approach to the relationship. The changes that happen within her are not just about you pulling away, but about the clarity and understanding that comes from distance. So while you may think that by stopping communication, you're giving her space, what you're really doing is allowing her to see you in a new light and ultimately to value the connection even more. This shift in perspective can lead to a deeper, more meaningful relationship where both sides are equally invested and where the effort comes from a place of genuine care and mutual respect.